If you hear something everyone else ignores, don't assume you're imagining it. Elias Vance had learned that lesson in places where machines failed quietly and people paid for noticing too late. That was why the faint metallic click beneath the polished floor of Citadel Asterion stopped him cold, while nearly 3,000 delegates continued talking above it. The Grand Council chamber floated inside a ring of artificial daylight, its curved walls reflecting silver, blue, and amber from a dozen alien biologies, while ventilation currents carried the clean scent of ionized air and something floral from the Illyrian delegation. Elias stood near a maintenance arch in a plain charcoal service uniform, one hand resting on the diagnostic case at his hip, looking like exactly what most of the room assumed he was, another human technician assigned to keep the station comfortable during diplomatic ceremonies. He preferred it that way. Important people rarely noticed the man checking the seams. The sound came again. Click. Pause. Click. Not loud enough to interrupt conversation, not sharp enough to trigger a sensor, but too regular to belong to cooling pipes. Elias tilted his head and listened past the hum of gravity stabilizers, the whisper of fabric, the musical clicks of translators converting 31 languages in real time. 7 seconds. Then silence. Across the chamber, Councilor Saelira Vey turned slightly in her seat, silver blue skin catching the overhead light like frost under moonlight. Elias had noticed her earlier because she watched humans differently from the others. Not with hostility, with curiosity sharpened by caution. She had arrived with the Illyrian science delegation and spent most of the morning studying Earth representatives as if trying to decide whether humanity was impressive, primitive, or simply loud. Elias met her eyes for half a second, then looked away. The floor vibrated beneath his boots. Barely anything. Less than the tremor of a passing transport. His pulse did not rise. It slowed. That bothered him more. He crouched beside the maintenance seam and placed 2 fingers against the metal. Cold. Colder than it should have been by several degrees. Something was drawing heat from the service corridor below. Problem, human? A nearby delegate asked, amusement curling through the translator. Elias stood. Maybe. The alien glanced at the ceiling. The station reports no malfunction. Stations report what their sensors understand. The delegate gave a soft laugh and returned to his conversation. Elias opened his diagnostic case and connected a manual probe to the floor junction. He avoided reading the display directly, watching instead as the instrument translated its findings into a soft sequence of tones. Normal pressure, normal atmosphere, normal power load. Then a 4th tone pulsed where there should have been nothing at all. Movement. Slow. Controlled. 20 feet beneath them. Elias straightened and scanned the chamber exits. Saelira was watching him now. This time she did not look curious. What did you find? She asked when he passed near her platform. Elias kept his voice low. Something that doesn't belong here. Her luminous eyes narrowed. A device. Another faint click traveled through the floor. Elias felt it through the soles of his boots before he heard it. His attention shifted toward the eastern access corridor. The air there seemed colder. No, he said. Somewhere beneath the council chamber, something moved again, then stopped at exactly the same moment Elias stopped. For the first time that morning, he felt the old instinct rise. Not panic, not anger, but the terrible clarity of being noticed by something that was also listening. Saelira saw the change in his face and whispered, "What is it?" Elias kept his eyes on the sealed corridor and answered softly, "I think it heard me too." Saelira held his gaze for 1 measured second, then turned toward the council floor as if nothing unusual had happened. Elias appreciated that. Panic moved faster than facts, especially in a chamber built to hold representatives from 47 worlds. He closed his diagnostic case and walked toward the eastern access corridor at an ordinary pace. Behind him, a Varkesh delegate had begun addressing the Assembly on Humanity's petition for expanded security privileges. The timing would have been funny under different circumstances. The Varkesh stood nearly 7 feet tall, armored naturally along the shoulders, with heavy forearms designed by evolution for climbing cliffs under twice Earth's gravity. Beside his image, the human anatomical model looked almost unfinished. Soft skin, modest teeth, no defensive plating, no venom, no specialized night vision. Elias listened while moving along the chamber wall. Earth's representatives continue to describe their species as unusually adaptable, the delegate said. Yet adaptation should not be confused with predatory capability. A ripple of restrained amusement passed through several delegations. Elias reached the corridor entrance. The air brushing his face was noticeably cooler now, carrying the dry metallic smell of recycled atmosphere and a trace of ozone. He checked the seam around the sealed door without touching it. No frost. No damage. Nothing obvious. Behind him, another council member spoke. Humanity's evolutionary record suggests persistence hunting. Historically, the Varkesh replied. Their modern population has little practical connection to such behavior. Saelira's voice entered the discussion, calm and precise. Evolution does not disappear because a species invents comfortable chairs. Several delegates laughed. Elias almost smiled. Almost. The faint clicking had stopped. That was worse. He stepped away from the door and studied the polished metal around it. Reflections stretched across the curved surface. Diplomats, attendants, security officers, pale columns of artificial daylight. One reflection moved when nobody did. Elias turned. Nothing. His heartbeat settled into a slow rhythm. He looked back at the metal. There, a distortion near the far service arch, no larger than a hand, as if something had briefly bent the light before withdrawing. Saelira had left her platform and approached him. You are missing a fascinating discussion about your species. I have heard versions of it before. They believe humans are harmless. That makes meetings easier. She studied him. Does it offend you? Elias finally looked at her. Being underestimated is only dangerous when you start believing it yourself. Before she could answer, the chamber lighting dimmed for less than a second. The gravity field gave a soft pulse beneath their feet. Conversations faltered, then resumed when everything stabilized. Elias watched the eastern corridor. Was that connected? Saelira asked. I do not know. He disliked saying it, but guessing was how people turned uncertainty into mistakes. A council security officer approached, irritated rather than concerned. Elias explained the temperature drop and unexplained movement beneath the floor. The officer consulted the station network, then shook his head. No unauthorized life signs. Send someone to physically inspect the lower service level. For a sound. For whatever stopped making it. The officer stared at him, clearly deciding whether the human technician was being dramatic. Then every translation channel in the chamber went silent at once. Not malfunctioning. Silent. Elias looked toward the diplomatic platforms. One seat was empty. He had seen its occupant less than a minute earlier. The Varkesh delegate stopped speaking. Saelira followed Elias's stare. Where did Councilor Marith go? Elias scanned the exits. None had opened. The eastern corridor remained sealed. Then his eyes dropped to the narrow ventilation seam beneath Marith's platform, where a faint trail of condensation marked the metal. Something had crossed the chamber without triggering a single alarm, and it had just taken a council member with it. Elias reached Marith's platform before council security had finished deciding who was in charge. The empty seat still held the Varkesh councilor's ceremonial mantle, folded against one arm, as though its owner had simply stood up for a moment. Elias ignored it. His attention stayed on the condensation near the ventilation seam. He lowered himself to one knee. The metal smelled faintly of ozone, but beneath it lingered something sharper, almost mineral, like cold rain striking hot pavement. Nobody touches this area, he said. The nearest security officer stiffened. You are maintenance personnel. Then consider this maintenance. Saelira arrived beside him before the officer could answer. Her silver-blue skin had lost some of its earlier shimmer under the colder light. What do you see? 3 things I do not like. Elias pointed without making contact. The first was a narrow interruption in the condensation, for inches above the floor. Something had displaced the moisture. The second was a tiny dark mark beside the ventilation grill. Not damage. Residue. The third was invisible until he opened his diagnostic case and passed a thermal probe through the air. The instrument responded with a descending series of tones. Cold pocket, he said. About 12 degrees below the chamber temperature. Saelira looked toward the sealed eastern corridor. The same direction as before. Elias nodded. A station technician hurried over and insisted the ventilation system showed no pressure change. Elias asked for the security recordings covering the last 2 minutes. The technician accessed them through his wrist interface, then described what the system had captured. Marith was seated. Delegates were talking. The chamber lights dimmed. Then Marith's chair was empty. How long was the interruption? Elias asked. 1.7 seconds. That number tightened something behind his ribs. Too clean. Random failures were messy. They drifted, stuttered, left fingerprints in neighboring systems. This had opened and closed like a door. Elias rose and walked toward the eastern corridor. Saelira followed. You believe someone engineered the outage. I believe coincidence is getting expensive. At the sealed door, Elias crouched again. The ozone smell was stronger here. He removed a slim mechanical driver from his case and loosened the lower service plate. The security officer protested until Saelira turned and said, If your sensors were sufficient, Councilor Marith would still be sitting behind us. Silence answered her. Elias removed the plate. Frozen air breathed through the opening. Inside, bundled cables disappeared into darkness. One cable carried a thin coating of translucent residue. Elias touched the probe to it. The instrument produced a chemical profile through spoken audio. The substance contained proteins, salts, and an unfamiliar silicate compound. Biological. Saelira heard it too. So something living passed through there. Something living that does not register as a life sign. Elias examined the opening. Too narrow for Marith. Wide enough for something smaller. That meant the counselor had not been dragged through it. The trail was not an escape route. It was an approach route. A soft chime sounded from Elias's probe as it detected another temperature change farther down the wall. He followed it 10 feet, then 15. At 19 feet, he stopped beside an ornamental column. There was another dark trace near its base. He looked back toward Marith's seat and reconstructed the geometry. Service seam, column, platform. Whatever had entered the chamber had moved between cover points while hundreds of witnesses faced the speaker. Not wandering. Stalking. Elias felt the old clarity return, colder this time. What? Saelira asked. He pointed toward the column. It watched him first. A sudden metallic sound came from the sealed corridor ahead. Not a click this time. 3 slow taps. Elias remained perfectly still. 3 seconds passed. Then the sound repeated from somewhere behind them. Same rhythm. Same spacing. Saelira turned toward him. Elias did not move. He understood the pattern now. Whatever was hiding inside Asterion was no longer merely tracking the council. It was testing how he responded. The second set of taps came from the western wall, 40 feet behind them. Several delegates finally noticed. Heads turned. Conversations thinned into uneasy whispers. Elias watched the room instead of the walls. Fear had a geometry. People moved toward exits, toward guards, toward anyone wearing armor. Within seconds, the orderly council chamber became a field of crossing bodies. That was exactly what a hunter would want. Nobody runs, Elias said. The security officer beside him frowned. You do not command this chamber. Then you say it. Another tap sounded overhead. The officer looked up. Elias did not. He was watching the reflections in the polished floor. A distortion slid beneath the artificial daylight, crossed 6 feet of open space, and vanished behind a diplomatic platform. Say it now. The officer activated his voice amplifier and ordered everyone to remain still. The command arrived too late. A frightened delegate near the eastern side broke from his group and rushed toward the main exit. Others followed. The chamber erupted into motion. Elias saw the distortion again. Faster this time. It did not pursue the nearest person. It angled toward the largest moving cluster. Stop! Elias shouted. Saelira caught the warning and froze. The others did not. A maintenance grill snapped loose from the wall and struck the floor with a sharp metallic crack. Something pale and low unfolded from the service opening, its outline difficult to hold in focus because its surface bent the surrounding light. No claws. No exposed teeth. Nothing theatrical. What made Elias's skin tighten was the precision of its movement. It waited until the crowd committed to one direction, then moved to intercept. Elias stepped directly into its path. Saelira seized his sleeve. What are you doing? Changing the pattern. He pulled a compact emergency beacon from his diagnostic case and rolled it across the floor toward the opposite wall. Its pulsing light bounced between the columns. The creature pivoted toward it for half a second. Enough. Elias grabbed Saelira by the forearm and guided her behind the nearest structural support as the security officers redirected the delegates away from the eastern exit. A gust of refrigerated air swept across Elias's face. The creature passed within several yards of them, visible only as a wavering absence in the light. then disappeared beneath another platform. Saelira's breathing had quickened. Elias could feel his own pulse striking hard against his ribs, but his hands remained steady. "You knew it would follow the beacon," she whispered. "I hoped it would investigate movement." "That is not the same thing." "No." He listened. The chamber had become unnaturally quiet. Hundreds of beings were trying not to breathe too loudly. Elias scanned the floor, columns, ventilation seams, and mirrored surfaces. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The creature had passed 3 unprotected delegates on its way toward the moving crowd. It could have reached any of them. It had chosen not to. "It is selecting behavior," Elias said. Saelira looked at him. "Meaning?" "Running triggers pursuit." A security officer 20 feet away heard him and immediately ordered everyone to hold position. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then one of the chamber doors began opening automatically. Beyond it waited a bright evacuation corridor. Relief swept through the delegates. Elias felt none. He had not heard the locking mechanism cycle. "Do not move," he said. The security officer stared at the open doorway. "That route leads directly to the secure shelters." Elias looked at the dark ventilation seam above the corridor entrance. Fresh condensation was forming there. The station did not open that door. Saelira followed his gaze, and understanding reached her face just as the lights inside the evacuation corridor began switching on one after another, leading away into the distance like a trail. The creature was not merely chasing movement anymore. It was learning how to make its prey run. The open corridor remained empty, bright, and inviting. Elias trusted it less with every second. He stepped away from Saelira and raised one hand toward the delegates. "Stay where you are." A senior council official answered from behind 2 security officers. "The shelters are less than 300 feet from that passage." "Then 300 feet is exactly how far something wants you to run." The official stared at him, but nobody moved. Elias crouched beside the nearest floor junction and opened his diagnostic case. He removed a maintenance light, a spool of conductive filament, and a palm-sized thermal calibrator used for testing environmental controls. None of it was designed for defense. That made it useful. Saelira lowered herself beside him. "You have a plan?" "I have a question." He connected the calibrator to the filament and slid the maintenance light across the floor until it rested 10 feet inside the corridor. "What question?" "Whether it wants movement, heat, or fear." Saelira glanced at him. "You can measure fear?" "No. That is the inconvenient variable." He activated the light. It rolled slowly down the corridor, casting warm pulses across the walls. Nothing happened. Elias increased the calibrator until the device radiated roughly the heat of a living body. Still nothing. Then he tugged the filament, making the light dart abruptly toward the chamber. A distortion dropped from the ceiling. The creature struck the moving device, knocking it sideways before retreating into the wavering air. Several delegates gasped. Elias pulled the filament back. "Movement," Saelira said. "Sudden movement," Elias corrected. "It waits for commitment." He rose and studied the chamber. The security officers had powerful weapons, but their attention kept jumping toward every sound. Too many barrels. Too many frightened hands. Elias pointed toward the floor. "Lower the weapons." The senior officer bristled. "Absolutely not. If it reacts to rapid motion, a room full of armed people spinning toward noises is helping it." Saelira stepped forward. "Do as he says." Her authority carried farther than Elias's uniform ever could. One by one, the weapons lowered. The atmosphere changed. Not safer. Quieter. Elias could hear the ventilation fans again. He could hear fabric shifting, nervous breathing, the faint electrical buzz inside the artificial daylight panels. Then he heard a soft scrape above Saelira. His body moved before language caught up. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, caught her around the shoulders, and guided her sideways behind the structural column. Something blurred through the space she had occupied and landed without a sound. Elias did not chase it. He stood between it and Saelira. The creature became partially visible for the first time, a lean shape roughly the size of a large dog, its pale surface bending the chamber light into watery ripples. It remained still. So did Elias. 10 feet separated them. His heartbeat hammered once, twice, then settled. The world narrowed into distance, angle, breath, exits. Saelira watched his face from behind the column. The easy maintenance worker was gone, not replaced by rage. replaced by focus so complete it frightened her more than anger would have. The creature tilted its head. Elias mirrored the movement almost. Unconsciously. Elias, Saelira whispered. Do not run. The creature shifted one foot. Elias shifted his weight. For several silent seconds, two descendants of very different evolutionary histories studied each other across polished metal. Then the creature backed away. It disappeared beneath a platform without attacking. Elias exhaled slowly. Saelira looked toward the place where it had vanished, then back at him. It recognized you. Elias closed his diagnostic case. No. His eyes followed a new line of condensation toward the council platforms. It reconsidered me. Then he noticed where the trail ended. Not at Saelira's seat. At the central platform reserved for the council leadership. Elias kept his attention on the central platform while the council chamber settled into a silence so complete that the gravity stabilizers sounded like distant thunder. The condensation trail ended beneath the raised dais where the presiding delegates had been seated minutes earlier. That changed the problem. A frightened animal might chase motion. A trained hunter might choose a target. Elias looked at the open evacuation corridor, then at the service seams running beneath the floor. We are leaving this room, he said. The senior security officer gave him a hard look. You just ordered everyone to stay still. That was before I knew where it was steering us. Elias opened his diagnostic case and removed 2 thermal calibrators, conductive filament, 3 maintenance lights, and a compact coolant cartridge. Saelira watched him arrange the pieces on the floor. Those are repair tools. Today they have broader responsibilities. He connected the calibrators to separate lights, then adjusted their heat output until each produced the thermal signature of a walking person. The coolant cartridge went between them. Elias tied the filament into a simple branching line and handed one end to the security officer. Pull slowly when I tell you. If anything moves toward them, release the coolant. The officer studied the improvised device. And what exactly will that accomplish? It will make the floor cold, bright, and confusing for about 8 seconds. 8 seconds. I have worked with worse. Elias selected a service passage on the western side, one without fresh condensation near its vents. The delegates would move in groups of 12, slowly, with 6 feet between each group. No sudden turns. No running. Security would remain distributed instead of forming a single cluster. Saelira listened, then began organizing the delegates before anyone could argue. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but Elias noticed her hands. They trembled once before she folded them behind her back. The first group entered the western passage. Nothing followed. The second made it halfway through. Elias pulled the filament. The heated lights rolled toward the eastern corridor, mimicking hurried movement. A pale distortion flashed between 2 columns. Now, the officer released the coolant. White vapor spilled low across the polished floor, turning the air into a glittering haze. The creature changed direction twice, confused by heat sources moving through the sudden cold. Elias counted silently. 1, 2, 3. The delegates kept walking. 4, 5. Something struck one of the lights and sent it spinning. 6, 7. The final group reached the western passage. 8. Elias backed toward the doorway with Saelira beside him. You built a trap without trying to capture it, she said. A trap does not have to close. Sometimes it only has to make something look the wrong way. They entered the service passage, and the security doors sealed behind them. Darkness swallowed the noise of the council chamber. Emergency illumination glowed faintly along the floor, painting Saelira's silver-blue features in muted violet. The corridor was barely 5 feet wide, crowded with insulated pipes and humming conduits. Elias finally allowed himself a full breath. Saelira heard it. You were afraid. He looked at her. Of course. You did not appear afraid. Those are different things. Before she could respond, Elias raised one hand. Somewhere ahead, metal scraped softly against metal. He reached for a maintenance light, then stopped. The sound was not coming from the passage ahead. It came from inside the wall beside them. 3. Slow taps followed. Saelira went still. Elias examined the conduit housing and noticed a narrow line of fresh frost forming across its surface. Then another line appeared 6 feet farther down. Then another. Not one trail. 3. Elias understood at once why the creature had been willing to retreat from the chamber. There is more than one, Saelira whispered. Elias watched the frost spread toward both ends of the corridor and shook his head. No, one creature could not coordinate this precisely. He placed his palm near the cold metal without touching it. The vibrations arrived in alternating patterns, answering one another through the walls. Whatever had entered Asterion was not hunting alone. It was communicating. The tapping stopped all at once. Elias disliked the silence more than the sound. He motioned for the delegates to continue toward the secure junction while he and Saelira remained near the rear. The narrow passage smelled of cold metal and electrical insulation, and every few seconds the station shifted around them with a low mechanical groan. Elias kept one hand near the wall, reading vibration through the air rather than touching the frost. Saelira walked beside him without speaking. 50 feet ahead, the last delegates disappeared around a bend. A faint scrape traveled through the conduit on their right. Elias stopped. Saelira stopped with him. Another scrape answered from the left. "They are surrounding us," she whispered. "Maybe. You sound remarkably calm about that possibility. I am trying not to insult them with assumptions." She stared at him. Despite everything, a brief spark of amusement crossed her luminous eyes. Is that human humor? Usually it works better when nobody is being hunted. They moved again, slower now. The emergency lighting faded as they entered a maintenance section where power had been deliberately reduced. Saelira's skin caught what little violet light remained, making her easier to see than Elias liked. He removed his charcoal service jacket and held it out. "Cover your shoulders." Her expression sharpened. "Why? You reflect light. That is considered attractive among Illyrians. Today it is considered visible." She accepted the jacket without argument. The fabric muted the shimmer of her silver-blue skin. They continued through near darkness until Elias raised a closed fist. Ahead, something shifted behind a ventilation panel. He heard a slow inhalation that did not belong to either of them. Saelira moved closer. Elias felt her hand touch his sleeve, not gripping, simply confirming where he stood. The gesture changed something subtle between them. She was trusting him without understanding what he was doing. He was responsible for making that trust worth something. Elias listened. One breath ahead. A vibration behind. Another above. 3 positions. Yet the timing was too exact. He frowned. "They are not surrounding us. You just said there might be several." "I was wrong." Saelira waited. "The sounds are repeating at fixed intervals. Same spacing. Same intensity." Elias looked toward the conduits. Something is sending one signal through different sections of the station. He removed his mechanical driver and lightly tapped a pipe twice. The sound traveled away. 2 seconds later, the wall ahead answered twice. Saelira's eyes widened. "It copied you." Elias tapped once. A single tap returned. Then he changed the pattern. 2 quick taps. Pause. 1 slow. The answer came perfectly. Not communication. Mimicry. He stepped closer to the ventilation panel. Cold air brushed his knuckles. "It is mapping responses," he said. "Learning which sounds make us stop, which make us move." Saelira studied him in the dim light. "You are learning it while it learns you." Elias glanced at her. That is generally how staying alive works. They reached the junction and found the delegates gathered beyond a pressure door. The senior security officer began sealing the passage behind them. Elias watched the mechanism engage, then noticed Saelira still wearing his jacket. Her hands were no longer trembling. "Earlier," she said quietly, "when you faced it, your heartbeat changed." Elias looked at her. Illyrian hearing. He had forgotten. It became slower. "Training." "No." Her gaze remained steady. "Training controls behavior. I heard your body change before you moved." Elias had no answer he trusted. Then a security officer called from the junction. They had recovered Councilor Meritha's personal communicator in an unused service chamber 2 levels below. Meritha himself was gone, but the station records contained something far more troubling. The chamber had been opened with valid diplomatic authorization 11 minutes before the first unexplained sound. Elias looked toward the assembled delegates. The creature had not broken into Asterion. Someone inside the council had let it in. The secure junction was designed to protect diplomats from explosions, decompression, and armed attack. It was not designed to protect them from one another. Elias felt that weakness immediately. 47 species crowded beneath the pale emergency lights, while security officers formed a perimeter around the pressure doors. Every face had changed. Minutes earlier, suspicion had been directed toward the creature. Now it moved silently between delegates. Saelira returned Elias's jacket, but he pushed it gently back toward her. Keep it, she understood without asking. Her natural shimmer would make her easier to track in the darker service levels. The senior security officer approached with Maritha's communicator sealed inside a transparent evidence container. The authorization came through diplomatic clearance, he said. Whose? Elias asked. The credential was masked after activation. That should not be possible. It is not supposed to be. Elias hated that phrase. Machines did not care what was supposed to happen. He asked for the sequence of events instead of the display itself. The officer explained that a lower service chamber had opened 11 minutes before the disturbance, remained accessible for 43 seconds, then sealed normally. No alarm. No forced entry. No recorded occupant. Elias looked toward the gathered delegations. Someone had understood Asterian well enough to make an intrusion look like routine traffic. Saelira stepped beside him. You are looking at them differently. I am counting. What? Who is frightened of the creature, and who is frightened of what we might discover? Her eyes moved across the room. Can you actually tell the difference? Not reliably. Elias rubbed his palms against his pants. Saelira noticed. Your hands are shaking again. Adrenaline. Yet when danger approached, they stopped. Elias gave her a brief look. Bodies are strange machines. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. She studied him for another second. My people evolved on open salt plains. When predators appeared, our ancestors survived by becoming still enough to disappear against reflected sunlight. Fear makes us freeze. Elias nodded. Humans have that response too. But yours did not. He considered the question. Fear tells you what matters. Training tells you what to do next. An instinct. Elias looked toward the pressure door. Instinct gives bad advice very quickly. Saelira almost smiled. Then a sound traveled through the junction. 3 slow taps. Every conversation died. Elias listened. The taps came again, but something was wrong. They were too loud. Too clean. He crossed to the wall and pressed his ear near the conduit housing. No vibration. The sound was coming through the station speakers. It is not the creature, he said. The senior officer turned toward him. Then what is it? Elias looked up as the tapping repeated throughout the junction. Someone had recorded the pattern and fed it into Asterian's internal audio system. A delegate near the rear panicked and moved toward another exit. Elias caught his arm before he could trigger the door. That is what they want. Who? The delegate demanded. Elias did not answer immediately. He was watching Saelira. Her silver-blue face had gone still. The creature learned our reactions, she said. Yes. Now someone is using what it learned. Elias released the delegate and examined the junction layout. 3 exits. 1 led toward the shelters. 1 returned toward the council chamber. The 3rd descended to environmental control. Suddenly the shelter door unlocked with a heavy mechanical clunk. Nobody moved. Elias felt a grim satisfaction. They were learning too. Then the environmental control door unlocked. Saelira looked at him. 2 invitations. 2 directions. Elias understood the implication. This was no longer about frightening the council into running. Someone was trying to separate a specific person from the group. Before he could identify who, every light in the junction went dark except the narrow violet strip above Saelira. The violet light made Saelira the brightest object in the junction. Elias understood the message immediately. So did everyone else. 47 delegations turned toward her, and for one dangerous second the room became exactly what the attacker wanted. Frightened eyes centered on a single target. Kill that light, Elias said. A security officer reached for the wall controls. No, do not touch the system. Elias pulled his maintenance light from the diagnostic case, adjusted it to a matching violet hue, and placed it beneath the cloak of a nearby ceremonial statue. Then he took Saelira by the sleeve and moved her 3 steps into darkness. The overhead strip went out. His maintenance light remained. A faint distortion appeared near the environmental control doorway. Elias saw it in the reflection of the polished floor. The creature was watching the false target. It did not choose her, Saelira whispered. Someone chose for it. Elias nodded. That distinction changed everything. Until now, the creature's behavior had looked intelligent because it adapted quickly. But the open doors, the recorded tapping, and the isolated lighting were not animal decisions. They were instructions layered over instinct. The creature was not the assassin. It was the weapon. Elias crouched near the junction controls without touching them. He asked the senior officer to describe every system event that had occurred since Marith vanished. Door permissions, lighting changes, audio routing, environmental fluctuations. The officer spoke while another security specialist checked the station records. Elias listened for sequence rather than detail. Every manipulation happened after the council reacted. The attacker was observing them in real time. They need access to internal security, Saelira said. More than access, Elias replied. They need a reason to be connected without attracting attention. Her expression changed. A diplomatic systems liaison. Elias looked across the delegates. 6 delegations employed authorized technical liaisons. Any one of them could reach limited station functions. None should have been able to control all 3 systems, unless separate permissions had been combined. Elias remembered the 1.7-second camera interruption. The service chamber opening. Maritha's missing communicator. Marith was not the first target, he said. Saelira frowned. He disappeared. His credentials disappeared with him. Elias asked the officer what authority Maritha's communicator carried. The answer came quickly. As Deputy Chair of Infrastructure Oversight, Marith possessed emergency access to environmental systems. Elias felt the pieces locked together. That is why they took him. They needed his authorization. Then why target me? Saelira asked. Elias looked at her. She was not merely an Illyrian scientist. She was a voting council representative, and the session had been debating humanity's security privileges. What vote comes after ours? He asked. Saelira went still. The Autonomous Defense Treaty. Who benefits if you are absent? Her eyes moved across the chamber. The treaty requires unanimous approval from the 5 principal signatories. Illyria is one. The senior officer lowered his voice. Without Councilor Vey, the vote fails automatically. Elias looked toward the false violet light. The distortion had vanished. A moment later, the environmental control door began closing. Not opening. Closing. Whoever controlled the station had realized the deception. Elias felt no triumph. Only confirmation. They are watching us closely enough to change plans. Saelira studied the delegates. Then the attacker is somewhere they can see us. Elias followed her gaze. Security personnel. Diplomats. Staff. Technical aides. Hundreds of possibilities. Then his attention settled on one small detail. During the darkness, everyone had looked towards Saelira except one person. A diplomatic liaison near the rear had been watching Elias instead. Their eyes met across the junction. The liaison did not look surprised. He smiled, reached calmly toward his wrist interface, and the pressure doors around Saelira began, sealing at once. The first pressure door dropped between Elias and Saelira with a hydraulic thud that shook the floor. Elias moved before the second could close, sliding his diagnostic case into the narrowing gap. Metal struck reinforced polymer. The case buckled, but the door stopped 6 inches above the floor. Manual release, Elias said. The senior security officer rushed toward the controls while Elias turned toward the diplomatic liaison. The man was already backing into the crowd. Stop him. 2 officers moved to intercept. Every light in the junction flashed white. A recorded tapping pattern thundered from the speakers, louder than before, and frightened delegates surged away from the noise. Elias lost sight of the liaison. Then cold air spilled across his boots. The creature was near. Nobody runs, he shouted. The command vanished beneath overlapping voices. Saelira remained trapped beyond the pressure door, separated from the main group by transparent security panels. Elias could see her forcing herself to stand still despite the movement around her. The liaison's voice rose from somewhere behind the delegates. Seal the intersection. The creature is following Councilor Vey. Sacrifice one compartment before we lose the entire council. The suggestion traveled through the frightened chamber with terrible efficiency. Elias watched several officials hesitate. That was all fear needed. A presiding delegate demanded an emergency containment vote. No, Elias said. He is giving you the answer he prepared before the question existed. The liaison appeared again near the shelter entrance. And the human technician proposes what? Risk hundreds for one Illyrian. Elias met his eyes. I propose we stop taking survival advice from the person controlling the doors. The liaison's smile disappeared. A pale distortion moved along the ceiling above Saelira's compartment. She saw Elias looking upward but did not follow his gaze. Good. She trusted him enough not to move. The emergency vote proceeded anyway. Fear had reduced complex minds to arithmetic. One life against hundreds. The result came quickly. The inner compartment would be isolated. Elias heard the locking bolts engage around Saelira. The senior security officer looked sick. I am sorry. Elias knelt beside his damaged case and removed the mechanical driver, conductive filament, and the remaining coolant cartridge. Do not be sorry yet. The council has issued a lawful containment order. Elias unclipped the small Asterian service insignia from his uniform and placed it on the floor. The officer stared at it. What are you doing? Making your paperwork easier. Elias dropped flat, reached beneath the jam pressure door, and found the emergency mechanical linkage with the driver. The opening was barely wide enough for his forearm. Cold metal pressed against his skin. Saelira crouched on the opposite side. Elias, if opening this door endangers everyone else, do not do it. His hand stopped. He looked at her through the transparent barrier. Her voice remained steady, but her heartbeat was fast enough that even he could see the pulse at her throat. That is what they are counting on, he said. That we accept the choice they designed. He turned the linkage. The door rose another inch. Somewhere above Saelira, metal scraped. Elias heard security officers ordering him to stop. He kept turning. 2 inches. 3. Enough. He pushed the coolant cartridge through first, then flattened himself against the floor and slid beneath the door. It slammed shut behind him. The chamber beyond became suddenly quiet. Saelira stared at him. You trapped yourself in here. Elias stood, listening to the creature move somewhere in the dark ventilation space above them. No. He wrapped the conductive filament around his hand and looked toward the maintenance corridor at the far end of the compartment. I stopped letting them decide where I go. Behind the transparent barrier, the liaison watched him. Elias watched back. Then the human turned away from safety and walked with Saelira toward the darkness. Elias entered the maintenance corridor first, leaving the bright junction behind until only a narrow wash of violet emergency light remained on the pipes. Saelira followed 3 feet back. He had told her the distance once. She remembered. The corridors smelled of chilled coolant and dust warmed by electrical conduits. Somewhere ahead, a ventilation fan rotated with an uneven rhythm. Elias counted each turn without meaning to. For seconds. 5. Something was interfering with the airflow. He stopped beside a branching service tunnel and closed his eyes. Saelira said nothing. There it was. A faint scrape from the right. Then another, farther away. The creature expected pursuit to follow noise. Elias turned left. Saelira followed immediately. You heard it the other way, she whispered. So did it. They moved deeper into Asterian. Elias no longer searched for the creature itself. He searched for what it disturbed. A tremor in hanging cable, a colder patch of air, condensation bending around an invisible body. His breathing slowed. The station became simple. Distance. Cover. Timing. Saelira watched the transformation from behind him. There was no fury in it. That unsettled her. Elias seemed less like a man becoming violent than a complicated machine becoming suddenly efficient. At the next junction, he found a fresh trace of translucent residue on a pipe 6 feet above the floor. He touched the thermal probe near it and listened to the spoken chemical analysis. The residue was cooling rapidly. Close, he murmured. A distortion flickered at the far end of the passage. Elias did not approach. He pulled the remaining coolant cartridge from his pocket and rolled it down a crossing tunnel. It struck the wall softly. The creature shifted toward the sound. Elias moved the opposite direction. For the first time, Saelira understood what frightened the council about human evolution. Elias was not stronger than the animal. He was predicting what it believed he would do, then refusing to do it. They reached a narrow observation bridge overlooking an environmental shaft nearly 60 feet deep. Across the bridge stood the diplomatic liaison. His wrist interface glowed faintly against his sleeve. Far enough, he said. Elias stopped. Saelira remained behind him. Councilor Vey stays here. The liaison continued. You walk away, and nobody else needs to be endangered. You already endangered everyone. For 1 vote. That usually makes it worse. The liaison's jaw tightened. He touched his wrist. Behind Elias came the soft scrape of something entering the bridge. Saelira inhaled sharply. Elias did not turn. He had already seen the creature reflected in the polished support rail. You should run, the liaison said. Elias watched his reflection instead. That is what it expects. He waited until the creature committed to the narrow bridge, then snapped the conductive filament around a maintenance lever and pulled. A pressure partition descended between Saelira and the creature, separating them without trapping the animal. Elias stepped sideways, opening a clear route toward the liaison. The creature hesitated. The liaison's confidence vanished. He backed away, then faster. The creature pivoted toward the sudden movement. "Stop running," Elias called. The liaison ignored him. Elias could have stayed where he was. The path between them was open, and the man who had engineered the entire nightmare had finally become the behavior he had taught the creature to pursue. Instead, Elias ran after him. Saelira stared through the partition in disbelief. The liaison reached the far end of the bridge as the creature closed the distance. Elias lunged forward, caught the back of the man's uniform, and pulled him into a recessed maintenance alcove. The creature swept past toward the moving machinery beyond and disappeared into the shaft access. The liaison collapsed against the wall, stunned. "Why?" he whispered. Elias stood over him, breathing hard. "Because you do not get to decide what kind of person I become." Then Saelira shouted his name. Elias turned. The pressure partition behind him was rising by itself, and the creature had not disappeared into the shaft at all. It had circled below them. Now it was climbing back towards Saelira. Elias was moving before the partition cleared the floor. He left the liaison in the alcove and sprinted back across the observation bridge, boots striking metal in hard, measured beats. Below, something pale climbed through the environmental shaft, its outline bending the violet light into ripples. Saelira stood beyond the rising barrier. Every instinct Elias possessed demanded speed. The creature had learned the same lesson. It heard him running and changed direction toward him. Elias slowed. One step, then another. The creature hesitated beneath the bridge. Saelira understood. She stopped moving too. For one suspended second, the three of them held perfectly still while machinery hummed 60 feet below. "Elias," Saelira said quietly. "The liaison still has control." Elias glanced back. The man was reaching for his wrist interface. Elias could cross the bridge and stop him. Saelira would remain exposed. Or he could stay with her and allow the man another chance to manipulate Asterion. The choice lasted less than a heartbeat. Elias stepped toward Saelira. Behind him, the liaison laughed once, breathless and disbelieving. "You are letting me go?" "No." Elias kept watching the shaft. "I am choosing her first." The liaison touched his interface. Nothing happened. He tried again. The senior security officer's voice came through the bridge speaker, explaining that his station access had been revoked. Saelira released a slow breath. The liaison stared at his useless device. For the first time, he was powerless. The creature climbed onto the bridge between them. Its camouflage weakened under the colder emergency lighting, revealing a lean, pale body built for silence rather than strength. Elias could see its chest moving rapidly. Not rage. Stress. He noticed a small metallic band beneath its neck, pulsing in time with the tapping patterns they had heard throughout the station. "Control collar," Elias said. Saelira followed his gaze. "Can you disable it?" "Maybe." The liaison backed away. His heel scraped metal. The creature turned toward him. He froze. Elias approached slowly from the side, mechanical driver in one hand. The animal shifted toward him, uncertain. His pulse pounded against his ribs. His hands did not shake. 5 feet. 4. 3. "You could let it take him," Saelira said softly, not as a suggestion but as recognition of the choice before him. Elias looked at the man who had used fear, manipulated the council, and offered Saelira's life as arithmetic. Then he looked at the creature wearing someone else's. Commands around its neck. That would still make it his weapon. He lowered himself carefully. The creature watched his hand. Elias waited until its attention shifted toward a distant mechanical vibration, then slipped the driver beneath the collar housing and twisted. The band released with a sharp click and fell onto the bridge. The creature recoiled. Nobody moved. Seconds passed. Without the pulsing device, its posture changed. The tension left its body. It looked toward Elias, then Saelira, then the liaison. Finally, it turned and disappeared quietly into the environmental shaft. Elias remained crouched until its movements faded. Security officers entered from the far passage and detained the liaison without resistance. Saelira approached Elias. You had him, she said. You had every reason to let nature make the decision for you. Elias picked up the control collar. Nature gave me instincts. It did not give them authority. Behind the glass walls of the observation level, council delegates had watched everything. No one spoke. They had expected the human predator to reveal itself when Elias began the hunt. Instead, they had witnessed something they understood far less. A predator capable of stopping itself. The council chamber felt different when Elias and Saelira returned. The artificial daylight had been restored, but one damaged panel flickered above the central platform, sending pale bands across polished metal. Ventilation carried the sharp scent of coolant from the service corridors. Nobody laughed when the human technician entered. The detained liaison had already been transferred to station security. Councilor Marith had been recovered alive from a sealed maintenance compartment, and the creature, freed from its control collar, had been contained without harm in an isolated environmental bay. The crisis was over. The silence was not. Elias crossed the chamber carrying his dented diagnostic case. One hinge dragged against the floor with a soft scrape. Saelira walked beside him, still wearing his charcoal service jacket over her silver-blue shoulders. Hundreds of delegates watched them reach the central platform. The presiding official rose. Elias Vance, this council witnessed conduct today that requires reconsideration of humanity's classification. Elias placed the damaged case beside his boot. That sounds expensive. A few delegates shifted. Saelira's mouth almost curved into a smile. The presiding official continued. Our assessments described humans as physically unremarkable generalists whose predatory ancestry had little relevance to modern behavior. Elias looked around the chamber. Earlier, those words had been delivered with amusement. Now the only sound was the faint hum of the gravity field. Saelira stepped forward. Light moved across her iridescent skin as she removed Elias's jacket and folded it carefully over one arm. You witnessed the relevance, she said. But I believe you misunderstood what you witnessed. The chamber remained still. Saelira turned toward Elias rather than the council. When danger appeared, his hearing narrowed. His heartbeat slowed. He tracked movement through reflections. He predicted pursuit behavior. He converted maintenance equipment into traps and used the station itself as terrain. Her fingers tightened once around the jacket. Every instinct we were taught to fear appeared exactly as our scientists predicted. Elias lowered his eyes briefly toward his scarred diagnostic case. Saelira faced the council again. Then he did something our models did not predict. He controlled it. A low murmur moved through the chamber. He protected delegates who mocked his species. He entered confinement when abandoning me was safer. He pursued the individual responsible, and, when that individual became prey, Elias saved him too. Finally, when he could have destroyed the animal used against us, he removed the device controlling it. Saelira placed Elias's jacket into his hands. You asked whether humanity still possesses a predator instinct. Today you received your answer. The presiding official looked toward Elias. And how would humanity describe what happened? Elias ran his thumb across a coolant stain on the sleeve. He could feel every eye in the chamber waiting for something grand. He had nothing grand to give them. My ancestors survived because they noticed. Danger, he said. We survived long enough to learn that noticing danger and becoming dangerous are not the same decision. No one spoke. The council proceeded to its interrupted vote. Saelira returned to the Illyrian platform and cast her approval for humanity's expanded security role. The measure passed. Then the Autonomous Defense Treaty followed, with Saelira present to cast Illyria's deciding approval. Hours later, when the chamber emptied, Elias knelt beside the eastern access door with his mechanical driver, repairing the warped service plate. Saelira stopped beside him. Beyond the observation glass, stars burned silently against black space. They will remember you as the human predator, she said. Elias tightened the final fastener and stood. I would rather they remember what I chose not to do. Saelira looked at him for a long moment, then toward the stars. That day, the council finally understood humanity's oldest instinct. The predator could awaken in a heartbeat, but the human decided what it was for.